My mother slept with my fiancé the night before my wedding, then I quietly walked down the aisle, but when the pastor asked if I took him for better or worse, I took the mic and turned to the crowd. What I said next silenced the whole church. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know, it's funny the things you remember. I can still hear the deep, heavy notes of the organ, the way they seem to make the very stones of St. Jude's Cathedral vibrate. It was a sound so grand, so final. I was standing there at the altar, looking down at my own hands. They were trembling, just slightly, against the smooth, cool ivory silk of my wedding dress. I remember clenching them into fists for just a second, trying to will them to be still. When I looked up, it was like looking at a painting. A sea of faces, 200 of them, maybe more. It wasn't just a crowd, it was my life. There were my friends from college, my dad's congregation looking up at me with such warmth, my colleagues from the publishing house in Chicago. And they were all waiting, holding their breath, for the moment I would become Mrs. Preston Hayes. The late morning sun was pouring through those magnificent stained glass windows, the ones that told the story of the saints in brilliant blues and reds. It was painting the marble floor with rainbows, so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. Everything, on the surface, was perfect. But my heart wasn't racing with joy. It was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, pounding with the weight of a terrible, crushing truth. A truth so monstrous it felt like it was about to split me right in two. How long? The question wasn't just a thought, it was a physical blow, over and over. How long had they been lying to me? My eyes scanned the front row and found her. My mother. Lorraine. She was sitting there, ramrod straight, in a stunning emerald green dress, perfectly coordinated with the wedding colors she'd chosen. Her smile was radiant, aimed right at me, a perfect performance of maternal pride. And the sickest part is, just 24 hours before, I would have seen that smile and felt nothing but love. 24 hours before, I still lived in a world where mothers protected their daughters, where love was sacred, where my life was a beautiful, predictable story. I felt a warm pressure on my hand and looked over. It was Preston. He squeezed my fingers, and his blue eyes were so warm, filled with what I had, for 3 years, mistaken for devotion. You ready for this, Audrey? He whispered, his voice laced with that easy, charming confidence that had drawn me to him in the first place. I looked right into his handsome face, the sharp jawline I'd traced with my fingers 1,000 times, the mouth that had whispered promises of forever into my ear, and I felt my whole world, all the chaos and the pain and the rage, just crystallize. It all sharpened into a single moment of perfect, terrible clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. Oh, I'm ready, I whispered back, and I was shocked at how steady my own voice sounded, even with the earthquake happening inside my chest. More ready than you could ever possibly know. To understand how I got there, standing at that altar like a soldier about to go into battle, you have to understand how perfect everything was just 3 months earlier. I was blissfully, foolishly happy. My name is Audrey Miller, and at 28, I honestly believed I had it all figured out. My life was a checklist of accomplishments. I was the daughter my parents had always dreamed of, the good girl, the smart one. I'd graduated with top honors from Northwestern with a degree in literature, and I wasn't just working, I had a career. I was a senior editor at a respected publishing house right here in Chicago. My life was neat, it was organized, and it had just been crowned with the ultimate prize. I was engaged to Preston Hayes, the golden boy of our community. Our engagement felt like it was a scene ripped straight out of a movie. I remember the night so clearly. Preston had gotten us tickets to the Lyric Opera to see La Traviata, my absolute favorite. During the second intermission, he led me out onto the balcony overlooking the river. The city lights were twinkling, the air was crisp. He started talking about our future, about building a life together. Then he got down on one knee. He opened a small velvet box, and inside was the most brilliant diamond I had ever seen. I cried, of course. I said yes. People on the balcony with us started clapping. It was perfect. Preston, at 31, was the complete package. He was a corporate attorney at one of Chicago's most prestigious firms, the kind of place with names on the door that sounded like old money. He was the son of Judge Donovan Hayes and the philanthropist Eleanor Hayes, a family whose name carried weight in the city. He drove a shiny black BMW, wore perfectly tailored suits, and had a smile that could disarm anyone. When we went to my parents' house to tell them the news, my mother, Lorraine, practically vibrated with excitement. She took my hand, her eyes not on me, but on the 2-carat diamond that sparkled on my finger. "Oh, Audrey," she gushed, "it's magnificent. You're going to have such a beautiful life together." Then she turned to my father, her voice filled with triumph. "The Hayes family is so prominent. She's done well, Walter. Our daughter has done so well." I should have caught it then. The strange emphasis in her words. Not, "You'll be so happy," or "He's perfect for you," but, "You've done well." As if I'd just graduated from law school or closed a major business deal, not found the person I was going to spend my life with. It was transactional. My father, Walter Miller, was just as pleased, but in a much quieter, more genuine way. He was the pastor of our church, a man who had built his life and his reputation on the foundations of family values and traditional morals. He was a good man, a truly good man. Seeing his only daughter engaged to be married into such a respected family, to a man he believed was honorable, felt like a blessing, a validation of everything he'd preached from the pulpit for 30 years. That night, after Preston had left, Dad pulled me into one of his warm, enveloping hugs, the kind that always made me feel safe. "He's a good man, Audrey," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can see how much he loves you. And more importantly, I can see how much you love him." Love. That was the word that mattered to my father. For my mother, I was beginning to realize, the word was achievement. The 2 months that followed were an absolute whirlwind of wedding planning, and my mother took to it like a general planning a military campaign. She threw herself into the preparations with an intensity that, at first, I found touching. I thought it was her way of showing love. But soon, it began to feel exhausting and controlling. She insisted on handling every single detail. We had a meeting with a wedding planner, a lovely woman I had researched, but after one meeting, my mother dismissed her. "Darling, she's competent, but she doesn't have the vision for an event like this," Lorraine had said. "Don't you worry. I'll handle it." And handle it, she did. It was supposed to be my wedding, but it quickly became hers. I remember one afternoon we went to the florist. I had this vision of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, baby's breath, all very natural and free-spirited, like a meadow. I showed the florist pictures I had saved on my phone. Before the florist could even respond, my mother stepped in. "Oh, Audrey, that's sweet. Very rustic." She said rustic the way you might say muddy. Then she turned to the florist with a brilliant smile. "No, no. We'll be doing classic white roses and peonies. Thousands of them. It's more elegant, more timeless. It will photograph beautifully." I tried to argue, just for a moment, but she put her hand on my arm and gave it a little squeeze. "Trust me, darling," she said, her voice dropping so only I could hear. "Mother knows best." It was like that with everything. I wanted a simple string quartet for the ceremony, she booked a full orchestra. I mentioned wanting to write our own vows, something personal and from the heart. She sat me down in the living room with a cup of tea and gave me a long speech about the sanctity and beauty of the traditional vows, how they had been spoken by generations and carried more weight. By the end of it, I felt silly for even suggesting it. She had a way of making her preferences seem like indisputable facts. Preston, for his part, seemed endlessly amused by my mother's takeover. He would drop by my parents' house unannounced, usually around dinner time, always with a perfectly chosen bottle of wine in hand. He charmed my father with stories about big cases at his law firm, and he absolutely captivated my mother. He'd stand with her in the kitchen for what felt like hours while I was in the study finishing up work calls or reading through manuscripts. I could hear their laughter drifting through the house, this easy, comfortable sound. "Your mother is just remarkable," he told me one evening. We were walking through Lincoln Park, the city lights beginning to sparkle across the water. "She's so devoted, so full of energy. She wants everything to be perfect for us." "She's always been like that," I'd replied, squeezing his hand, feeling a pang of guilt for my own frustration. "She's a perfectionist. It comes from a place of love, I'm sure," he said, stopping to turn and face me. He framed my face with his hands, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. "Just like you're perfect." I should have wondered then why he spent so much time talking about my mother. I should have questioned the way his eyes would follow her when she moved through a room, or how he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make her laugh, that genuine, throaty laugh she rarely shared with my father anymore. But I was so deeply in love. And love, as I was about to learn the hard way, doesn't just make you blind, it makes you a willing fool. The first real crack in the foundation of my perfect world appeared on a Wednesday, about 3 weeks before the wedding. I'd told my mom I would stop by after work to help finalize the seating chart, which had become a ridiculously complicated affair. I let myself in the front door around 6:30, my usual time, my arms loaded with RSVP cards and my heavy laptop bag slung over my shoulder. The house was eerily quiet. Normally at this time, I'd hear the TV in the living room or music from the kitchen. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, setting my things down on the bench in the foyer. In the kitchen, "Sweetheart," my mother's voice called back. But it sounded off. Higher pitched. Strained. I walked into the kitchen and found her standing at the sink with her back to me. She was vigorously scrubbing a plate that, from what I could see, was already perfectly clean. Her dark hair, which was usually coiffed into a perfect helmet of style, was slightly mussed, with a few strands sticking to the back of her neck. When she turned around, her cheeks were flushed a deep, blotchy pink. "Oh, Audrey, honey. I didn't expect you so early." She fumbled with the dish towel, drying her hands with jerky movements. "It's 6:30, I said, checking my watch. "It's Wednesday. This is when I always come." Of course. My mind is just everywhere with this wedding. She wouldn't look me in the eye. "Your father's at the church board meeting tonight. It'll probably run late." Something felt profoundly wrong. The air in the kitchen was thick with a strange energy. And it smelled different. Not like my mother's usual vanilla-scented candles or the roast chicken she often made on Wednesdays. It smelled masculine. Like an expensive, spicy cologne I didn't recognize. "Was someone here?" I asked, my voice casual as I spread the RSVP cards on the massive kitchen island. "What?" "Oh, no, silly. Just me. All day." She turned back to the sink and started rewashing the same plate. "So, how was your day, darling?" I almost let it go. I swear I did. I was tired, I was hungry, and I just wanted to get the seating chart done. But then my eyes landed on the counter next to the coffee maker. There was a single coffee mug, one from the good china set, the ones with the delicate gold trim that we only ever used for important guests, like the bishop or Judge Hayes. I reached out and touched it. The porcelain was still warm. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Whose mug is this?" I saw her shoulders tense up under her silk blouse. "It's mine, of course." "You never drink coffee," I stated. "Let alone in the evening. You say it keeps you up all night." I was feeling dreadfully tired," she stammered, finally turning to face me, her eyes darting around the room, landing on everything but my face. "I just needed a little pick-me-up. All this planning." The lie was so obvious, so poorly constructed, it was almost insulting. It hung in the air between us, a shimmering, ugly thing. My mother had never been a good liar. Her tells were as familiar to me as my own reflection, the lack of eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice, the frantic, compulsive need to be busy with her hands. But this was my mother. The woman who had taught me right from wrong. And I loved her. So I made a choice. I chose to believe her. Okay, I said, my voice betraying none of my inner turmoil. I picked up the first RSVP card. Well, let's get this done. I have a feeling Uncle Robert should not be seated next to Aunt Carol after what happened at Easter. She let out a relieved little laugh, and the tension in the room dissipated, but not completely. Throughout the evening, I caught her glancing at her phone, her fingers tapping in nervous rhythm against the granite. And later, around 8 p.m., when Preston texted me, "Hey, babe. Swamped at work. Going to be a late one. See you tomorrow. Love you." I saw her whole body relax. A long, slow exhale, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. And I filed that away, another little piece of the puzzle I didn't yet know I was solving. A week later, the second crack appeared, this one deeper and more alarming. Preston had been distant all week. He'd cancelled our usual Thursday night dinner, saying he had to work late. He'd then missed our cake tasting appointment on Saturday, texting at the last minute that a client emergency had come up. I was hurt, but I tried to be understanding. His job was demanding. But when I called his office on Saturday afternoon just to see how he was, his secretary, a sweet woman named Carol, answered. "Oh, Audrey, hi," she said cheerfully. "You just missed him. He left for the day about an hour ago." My blood ran cold. He had lied. Why would he lie? A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I got in my car and drove to his apartment in the Gold Coast. It was a sleek, modern high-rise with a friendly doorman who knew me by name. "Good afternoon, Ms. Miller," he said with a smile. Going up to surprise him? I just nodded, my own smile feeling stiff and unnatural. The elevator ride up to the 15th floor felt like an eternity. Each ding of a passing floor sounded like a tick on a time bomb. I got to his door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. Finally, I used the key he'd given me and let myself in. "Preston? It's me. Are you okay?" The apartment was dark and silent, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. His car was in its designated spot in the garage. I had checked on my way in. I called his name again, my voice echoing in the large, empty living room. We had spent so many hours in this room, curled up on the leather sofa, planning our future, planning our honeymoon to Italy. My eyes scanned the room and landed on the coffee table. There was a single wine glass. Just one. But it had a smudge of dark, bold red lipstick on the rim. My lipstick was always a neutral pink. I never wore red. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. "Preston?" I walked toward his bedroom. I tried the handle, but it was locked. That was beyond strange. In 3 years, he had never, ever locked his bedroom door. I knocked. "Preston, I know you're in there. What's going on?" A moment of silence, and then his voice came through the thick wood, muffled and strange. "Audrey? I'm here. Are you okay? Why is the door locked?" I'm not feeling well," he said. The words were slurred, as if he'd just woken up. "I think I have food poisoning. It's bad." "Oh, no." "Let me in. Let me take care of you. I can get you some ginger ale, some crackers." "No, no," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "It's really contagious, whatever it is. I don't want you to catch it. I just need to sleep it off. I'll call you tomorrow, I promise. Okay?" I stood there, my hand still on the cold brass doorknob, my mind racing. Food poisoning? Contagious? The man who wanted me to bring him soup for a common cold, who loved being babied and taken care of when he was sick, was now locking me out? It made no sense. Nothing made sense. The lipstick, the locked door, the lie about being at work. But what could I do? I couldn't kick the door down. So, again, I made a choice. I chose to push the suspicion down, to cling to the illusion of trust because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. Okay, I said, my voice small. Feel better. I love you. There was a pause. Then, a beat too late, his voice came back. Love you, too. I walked out of that apartment and back into the bright afternoon sunlight, but everything looked gray. The cracks were no longer small fissures. The foundation of my life was beginning to crumble. The truth, I've finally learned, has a way of finding you, whether you're looking for it or not. It doesn't care if it's inconvenient. It doesn't care if it will destroy you. It just is. And 2 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, the truth came for me. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at my office, buried in manuscripts, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed my mother's name. Audrey, darling, I need a massive favor, she said, her voice breezy and light. Of course, Mom. What's wrong? It's nothing, really, just a silly mistake. I left the wedding programs in my car, and I'm already here at the club for my lunch with Mrs. Gable from the flower committee. There's no way I can make it home and back in time. Could you possibly be an angel and swing by the house to grab them for me? Sure, no problem, I said, already grabbing my purse. A part of me was relieved to have an excuse to get out of the office. Oh, you're a lifesaver. They're in my Mercedes, in a big manila envelope right on the passenger seat. You can't miss it. The car's unlocked. The drive to my parents' house was the same 20-minute route I'd taken thousands of times, but today the familiar suburban streets felt alien. I used my key to get through the front gate and parked behind my mother's gleaming silver Mercedes in the driveway. Just as she'd said, the car was unlocked. I opened the passenger door, and the scent of her perfume, that same expensive, floral scent she'd worn my whole life, wafted out. The manila envelope was right there on the seat. But as I reached for it, my fingers brushed against something wedged down between the passenger seat and the center console. It was a small, black moleskine notebook, the kind writers use. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. My mother was always jotting down notes for her various committees and charity boards. I started to tuck it back into the side pocket of the seat, but then I saw it. My name. Audrey. Written on the cover in my mother's elegant, looping handwriting. A chill, sharp and violent, went down my spine. Why would she have a journal with my name on it? It wasn't a planner for my wedding, we had a separate, massive binder for that. This was something else. Something private. My heart started to pound. I should have just left it. I should have taken the envelope and walked away. But I couldn't. It was like a magnetic force was pulling me in. I sat down in the driver's seat of my mother's car, the leather cool against my skin, and with hands that were shaking so badly I could barely control them, I opened the notebook. The first page was dated 3 months ago, just a few days after Preston and I had announced our engagement. Preston Hayes is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. Instead, I settled for Walter and his middle-class ministry, his quiet books and his predictable sermons. For 30 years, I have been the dutiful pastor's wife. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful, something exciting, for once in my life. The notebook slipped from my numb fingers and fell onto the car's floor mat with a soft thud. I couldn't breathe. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the car, out of the world. I sat there, frozen, staring at her handwriting as the familiar, comfortable world I knew tilted violently on its axis. My ears were ringing. This couldn't be real. It was a joke. A misunderstanding. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I picked up the notebook again. I had to know. I had to see it all. I forced my eyes to scan the page, and the next, and the next. I don't know how long I sat there in my mother's car, parked in the driveway of the house I grew up in. The sun moved across the sky, and the familiar suburban afternoon continued around me, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world was burning to the ground. I just sat there, reading. Forcing myself to absorb every single, poisonous word. The journal was a meticulous documentation of a betrayal so calculated, so profound, it defied comprehension. An entry from 2 months ago: he looks at me the way Walter used to, back before the years and the routine wore all the passion away. When Preston compliments my dress or my cooking, when his eyes linger on me for just a second too long, I feel a spark. I remember what it felt like to be truly seen, to be desired. Another, from 6 weeks ago: today, he stayed after Audrey left for work. He said he wanted my opinion on a legal matter, but we both knew that was an excuse. We talked for hours, about literature and travel and all the things I used to dream of. He said I was wasted on this small suburban life. He's right. I am. Then, the entries turned darker. I know this is wrong. I know what this would do to Audrey if she ever found out. She is my daughter, my only child. But when was the last time anyone chose me? Really chose me, not out of duty or convention, but out of pure, unadulterated want? Preston wants me. I can feel it. Page after page, it was all there. The coffee date at my parents' house, the day I'd caught her. The secret meetings. The lies. He kissed me today, in the kitchen, right after Audrey left. God help me, I kissed him back. It was reckless and stupid and the most alive I've felt in 20 years. And then, the entry that shattered the last remaining piece of my heart. We made love in his apartment this afternoon, while Audrey was at her monthly book club meeting. He said he had to work late. I told Walter I was at a charity dinner. It was so easy. He said I was more passionate, more woman, than anyone he'd ever been with. I finally feel alive again. My mind flashed to the locked door. The lipstick on the glass. It all clicked into place, a perfect, horrifying picture of deceit. The final entries were about the future. Their future. Preston says that after the wedding, we'll find a way to be together. He says marrying Audrey is just what's expected of him. His father, the judge, has his entire career path mapped out, and a messy broken engagement would be a disaster. A quiet divorce a few years down the line, however, is manageable. He says we just have to be patient. I will be his wife in every way that matters. The final entry was dated yesterday. The night before. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding, he's coming over while Walter is at his bachelor party planning meeting at the church. It will be our last time together before Audrey becomes his wife in name. After that, we'll have to be so much more careful. But we've come too far to stop now. I deserve this. I closed the notebook. The shaking in my hands had stopped. I just sat there, in a perfect, horrifying stillness. Around me, the world continued. A neighbor waved as he got his mail. A school bus rumbled down the street. Normal life was happening, but I was no longer a part of it. I was in a different place now, a cold, dark place where love was a lie and family was a weapon. How long? The question came back, but this time it wasn't frantic. It was a cold, hard echo. How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? I thought about every family dinner, every holiday, every shared glance I had been too trusting to interpret correctly. I thought about my father, my good, kind, unsuspecting father, planning to walk me down the aisle tomorrow, ready to place my hand in the hand of the man who was sleeping with his wife. I thought about all the ways I'd been fooled, manipulated, and utterly betrayed by the two people who were supposed to love and protect me most in the world. And that's when the tears finally came. Not quiet, sad tears. They were hot, ugly, angry tears that tasted like salt and betrayal. I cried until my chest ached, until my mascara ran in black, greasy streams down my cheeks, until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me. They had made their choice. Now, I was going to make mine. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't face my apartment, filled with wedding gifts and pictures of a smiling man I no longer knew. I couldn't face the barrage of calls I knew would come. So I drove downtown, to the Langham Hotel. I walked up to the front desk, my face tear-streaked and blotchy, and I checked in under a false name, paying with cash I took from an ATM. I remember telling the polite young man at the desk that I was surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie came so easily, so naturally. I guess I was learning to be as good at deception as my mother and my fiancé. My room was beautiful, with a sweeping view of the city skyline, but I didn't see it. I walked in, dropped my purse, and spread everything out on the immaculate king-sized bed like a general planning a campaign. My mother's journal was Exhibit A. I took out my laptop, my hands moving with a strange, detached purpose, and logged into our shared credit card account, the one we'd opened for wedding expenses. And there it was, in stark black and white, charges from a high-end wine shop for cases of the exact Pinot Noir my mother raved about in her journal. Charges from a fancy restaurant near Preston's apartment on the nights he'd told me he was working late. The evidence was damning. I sat cross-legged on the bed and started making a list, a timeline of their deceit. All the signs I'd missed, all the little lies I'd chosen to ignore. The expensive cologne smell in my parents' kitchen. The lipstick on the wine glass in Preston's apartment. His sudden, detailed knowledge of my mother's favorite authors. The way they had both been so insistent that we use the traditional, impersonal wedding vows. It was all there. They probably feared that if I wrote my own, I might say something too specific, too personal, that would expose their guilt. I ordered room service, an overpriced pasta carbonara, and I ate every bite, methodically, fueling myself. The old Audrey, the woman I was yesterday, would have fallen apart. She would have confronted them privately, her voice choked with tears. She would have screamed and demanded explanations and, knowing my mother, probably would have ended up being manipulated into some kind of twisted, quiet forgiveness to save the family from scandal. The old Audrey believed in second chances. She believed love could conquer anything. But the old Audrey was dead. She had died in a silver Mercedes-Benz in a quiet suburban driveway, with her mother's treachery in her hands. The new Audrey, the one eating pasta in a 5-star hotel room, understood that some betrayals are too profound, too fundamentally rotten, for a private resolution. This wasn't just about a cheating fiancé. This was about two people who had conspired to build their sordid affair on the foundation of my life. They planned to use my marriage, my home, and my trust as their cover. They hadn't just stolen my happiness, they had tried to steal my dignity. They wanted me to be an unwitting accomplice in my own humiliation. They wanted to play games. Fine. I had learned from the very best. I picked up the hotel phone and made my first call. It was to my assistant at the publishing house, Jenna. I woke her up, but I didn't care. Jenna, it's Audrey. I need you to do me a huge favor, and it's urgent. Audrey? It's almost midnight. Is everything okay? You sound different. Everything's perfect, I said, and the chilling part is, I meant it. I need a complete guest list for everyone who's coming to the wedding tomorrow. Not just names. I need email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles if you can find them. Everything. Can you get that to me within the hour? Sure. I think so. But why? I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow's event. Next, I called my college roommate, Sabrina. She was a freelance journalist in New York, scrappy and brilliant. Audrey. Oh my God, you should be sleeping. It's the night before your wedding. Are you freaking out? I am so excited for you. Sabrina, I said, my voice low and even, cutting through her excitement. I need a favor. A big one. And I need you to not ask any questions until tomorrow. Can you do that? Her voice immediately grew cautious. Okay. What kind of favor? I need you to get on the first flight from LaGuardia to O'Hare in the morning. I need you to be at St. Jude's Cathedral by 11 a.m. with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen, and I want it documented by someone I trust. Audrey, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'm not the one who should be scared, I replied, and hung up. The final call was the hardest. My hand hovered over the keypad for a long time before I dialed. I knew my father would be home from his meeting. He answered on the second ring. Audrey, sweetheart, you shouldn't be calling me. Isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding? He joked, his voice warm and full of love. And that's what broke me. Just for a second. Dad, I said, and my voice cracked, a single tear escaping and rolling down my cheek. Dad, I love you. I need you to know that. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how chaotic or ugly it gets, I need you to remember that I love you. And that none of this is your fault. Honey, you're worrying me. What's wrong? Are you having second thoughts? No, I said, my voice firming up again. I'm not having second thoughts. I'm having first thoughts. For the first time, everything is clear. Nothing's wrong, Dad. Everything's finally going to be right. After I hung up, I sat in the silent, sterile darkness of the hotel room for a long time. I thought about justice and I thought about revenge, and the fine, blurry line between them. Revenge, I decided, was about causing them the same pain they caused me. But that wasn't enough. Justice was about revealing the truth, about holding them accountable in the court of public opinion, the only court my mother and Preston ever truly cared about. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be seeking revenge. I would be serving justice. And I would do it with a smile on my face. I woke up at dawn, long before the sun. I remember sitting by the enormous window in my hotel bathrobe, a cup of strong, black coffee from room service cradled in my hands. I watched the sky over Chicago slowly change from inky black to bruised purple, then to shades of gold and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day. In just a few hours, I was supposed to become Mrs. Preston Hayes. Instead, I was about to become something much more powerful. I was about to become a woman who refused to be anyone's fool. My phone, which I had left on the nightstand, had been buzzing intermittently all morning. I picked it up. A string of texts from my mother. Good morning, beautiful bride. I hope you slept well. Today is the day. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle today. I'll be there in the front row, probably crying my eyes out. I just spoke to the florist and the musicians are setting up. Everything is exactly as it should be. Perfect. And the last one, sent just minutes ago. I love you so much, sweetheart. Today is going to be the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a small, sharp stab. The hypocrisy was so breathtaking it was almost impressive. I didn't reply. At 9 o'clock, I took a long, hot shower. I stood under the scalding water until my skin was pink, letting it wash away the last traces of the naive, trusting woman I used to be. When I stepped out and wiped the steam from the bathroom mirror, I looked at myself. I really looked at myself, maybe for the first time in months. I saw my dark hair, so much like my mother's, and for a second, I hated it. I saw my blue eyes, inherited from my father, and I found a little strength there. I saw a face that had always been called pretty or sweet, but never strong or remarkable. Today, I decided I would be remarkable. My bridesmaids were supposed to meet me at the church, so I drove there alone, taking the long way along Lakeshore Drive, the blue of Lake Michigan stretching out to the horizon. The morning was crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day. St. Jude's Cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its limestone spires reaching toward heaven like a prayer made of stone. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw that cars were already arriving. Early guests, vendors in their white vans, family members bustling about, getting ready for what they believed would be a joyous celebration. I parked in my designated spot behind the church and just sat for a moment, watching. I saw Mrs. Gable from the flower committee, directing two young men with a massive arrangement of white roses. I saw Mr. Rodriguez, our neighbor for 20 years, helping his wife out of their car. I saw a group of Preston's law school friends, laughing and adjusting their ties, looking forward to the open bar. All of these people who cared about me, had taken time out of their Saturday to witness the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved better than a lie. They deserved to know the truth, too. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the heavy garment bag holding my wedding dress, my shoes, and my makeup bag, and walked into the cathedral through the side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small, ornate room was already a hive of activity. My maid of honor, Meredith, was hanging up her blush-pink dress. My other two bridesmaids were setting up a little coffee station and arranging a tray of pastries. Audrey! Meredith rushed over to hug me, her face beaming. Oh my God, you're glowing. You don't look nervous at all. How are you feeling? Like today is going to change everything, I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. I offered her a small, calm smile. Inside, my heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. The new Audrey was in control. Where's your mother? Meredith asked, looking around the bridal suite as she helped me unpack my things. I thought she'd be here bright and early, directing traffic. I glanced at my phone. No new messages from Lorraine since her syrupy sweet good morning texts. I knew, in that moment, she was at home, probably taking an hour to do her makeup, another hour to do her hair, ensuring she looked like the perfect, grieving mother of the bride when the time came. The thought was so repulsive it strengthened my resolve. She's probably getting ready, I said with a shrug. You know how she likes everything to be perfect. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt strangely, powerfully calm. The ivory silk slipped over my skin not like a dress, but like armor. When Meredith began fastening the dozens of tiny, tedious pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming with each click. I wasn't Audrey Miller, the heartbroken fiancé, anymore. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger. The dress itself had been my mother's choice, of course. A traditional A-line gown with long lace sleeves, a cathedral train, and enough intricate beadwork to rival a constellation. I'd originally wanted something much simpler, more modern and sleek, but Lorraine had insisted. I remember her at the fitting, circling me like a hawk. This dress will photograph beautifully, she'd said, her voice filled with authority. Classic elegance never goes out of style, darling. Now, standing in front of the mirror, I finally understood why she had been so invested in how I looked. She needed the pictures to be perfect. She needed me to be the perfect bride in the perfect dress, a beautiful prop in the carefully constructed narrative of her life. She was documenting her own triumph, not my happiness. Well, I thought, she was about to get some photographs she would never forget. Meredith carefully pinned my veil in place, her hands gentle. You look absolutely, breathtakingly stunning, Audrey, she whispered, her eyes welling up. Preston is going to die when he sees you walking down that aisle. I certainly hope so, I murmured, so quietly she didn't hear. At 11:45, a knock came at the door. It was my father. He stood in the doorway, looking so handsome and distinguished in his formal black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. But his eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless sadness. He was a man whose world had been shattered. "Hi, beautiful girl," he said, his voice a little hoarse. The bridesmaids and the photographer, sensing the gravity of the moment, tactfully stepped aside, busying themselves in the far corner of the room to give us a moment of privacy. I walked over to him and took his hands in mine. They were cold. These strong, gentle hands that had blessed countless couples at the start of their new lives, that had held me when I scraped my knees as a child, that had taught me how to drive and how to pray and how to believe in the fundamental goodness of people. "Dad," I said softly, "I need to tell you something." Before we walked down that aisle. "Of course, honey." "What is it?" His face was etched with worry. He knew from my call last night that something was terribly wrong. I didn't say another word. I just reached into my bridal bag, pulled out the small black notebook, and placed it in his hands. "I found this," I said simply. "In Mom's car. Yesterday." He looked down at the journal, confused, then opened it to the first page. I watched his face as he began to read. It was one of the most painful things I have ever had to witness. I saw the confusion melt into disbelief, then into dawning horror, and finally, into a look of such profound devastation that it physically hurt me to see it. The color drained from his cheeks. His lips parted slightly, and the hands holding the journal began to tremble violently. "Audrey." His voice was a strangled whisper. "This can't be real. Your mother, she would never." "Keep reading, Dad," I urged gently. "Read the dates. Read all of it." He sank into a nearby armchair as if his legs had given out, his eyes never leaving the pages, scanning line after line of his wife's betrayal. I knelt on the floor beside him, my expensive wedding dress pooling around us like spilled cream. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, the only sounds in the room the rustle of turning pages and my father's ragged breathing. Finally, he closed the journal. He looked up at me, this good man who had built his entire ministry on the sanctity of marriage and family, and I saw something vital break behind his eyes. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice choked with pain. "Since yesterday," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry you had to find out like this." "What are we going to do?" he whispered, looking around the room as if he was seeing it for the first time. "What in God's name are we going to do?" I put my hand on his. "We," I said, my voice firm and clear, "are going to walk down that aisle. We are going to stand at that altar. And we're going to let everyone see exactly who Lorraine Miller and Preston Hayes really are." "Audrey, no," he pleaded, his pastoral instincts kicking in. "Think about this. The scandal, the humiliation for our family. The humiliation isn't ours to carry, Dad," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "It's theirs. They built this house of lies. I'm just going to be the one to light the match." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the war going on inside him, the 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly, behind closed doors, versus the raw, undeniable truth of his wife's treachery. "There are 200 people out there," he said, his voice weak. 200 people who love us," I countered. 200 people who deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. "What about your reputation?" "My reputation," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I had, "will be that of a woman who refuses to be made a fool of. A woman who chose her dignity over a comfortable silence." A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. "5 minutes, everyone," called the wedding coordinator through the door. Dad stood up slowly, his legs still a bit unsteady. For a second, I was afraid he might collapse right there. But then he did something that made me prouder than I have ever been. He straightened his shoulders, squared his jaw, and looked at me with a flicker of his old strength, mixed with a new, fierce pride. "You're braver than I ever was, Audrey," he said quietly. "I learned from the best," I replied. He offered me his arm, his hand covering mine. And together, we walked toward the sanctuary doors, ready for the final act. Through the small glass panels in the heavy oak doors, I could see it all. The cathedral was filled to capacity, a tapestry of familiar faces. The altar was a masterpiece of white roses and peonies, an elegant, fragrant monument to my mother's taste. The string orchestra was playing Pachelbel's canon, the melody so beautiful and pure it felt like a mockery. And there he was. Preston. Standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney, the devoted bridegroom. His best man and groomsmen flanked him, all of them smiling in anticipation. And in the front row, there she was. My mother, Lorraine, radiant in her emerald dress, dabbing delicately at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked exactly as a mother of the bride should look, proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. What incredible actors they both are, I thought with a cold, detached clarity. They should have been on Broadway. The wedding coordinator gave a crisp nod, and the sanctuary doors swung open. The processional music began. My bridesmaids started their slow, measured walk down the aisle in their soft pink dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar. Then, the music swelled, shifting into the triumphant chords of the bridal march. As one, every single person in that cathedral rose to their feet and turned to look at us. "Ready?" Dad whispered, his grip on my arm tightening. I squeezed his arm back. "Ready." We stepped into the sanctuary, and I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn toward us. It was a wave of energy, of expectation. Cameras flashed like tiny bursts of lightning. I could hear people whispering, "She looks so beautiful, what a lovely couple." I kept my eyes fixed on the altar. I saw Preston's face light up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what, to anyone else, would have looked like genuine, all-consuming love. I saw my mother press her handkerchief to her eyes, a perfect portrait of maternal devotion. The walk down that long aisle felt like it took a lifetime. With each step, I felt more resolved, more certain. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of liberation. We reached the altar. My dad, following tradition, placed my hand into Preston's. The gesture was meant to symbolize a father giving his daughter to the care of another man. Instead, in that moment, it felt like I was being handed over to my enemy, a final, necessary step in the plan. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Jenkins began, his kind, familiar voice carrying easily through the cathedral's excellent sound system. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God to witness and bless the union of Preston William Hayes and Audrey Elizabeth Miller in the sacred covenant of holy matrimony." I let him speak. I stood there, my hand resting lightly in Preston's, and I followed along with the traditional ceremony, my face a mask of serene bridal joy. I was waiting. Biding my time. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to believe, right up until the very last second, that they had one. The pastor spoke of love, of commitment, of faithfulness. Each word was a sharp, painful irony. Preston squeezed my hand during a prayer, and I squeezed back, playing my part. In the front row, my mother watched with a glowing, tearful pride. They had no idea what was coming. The orchestra played softly. The candles flickered. The trap was set. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Pastor Jenkins continued, his voice resonating with sincerity, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. How appropriate, I thought, a bitter smile almost touching my lips. Let's talk about reverence. Let's talk about God's purposes. He turned to the congregation. "If there is anyone present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." A heavy silence fell over the cathedral. This was it. This was the moment from the movies, the moment I could have spoken up, could have revealed everything right then and there. But that wasn't my plan. That would have been too easy, too quick. I wanted them to stand at the precipice. I wanted them to make their vows of lies in front of God and everyone they knew. I remained silent. I let Pastor Jenkins continue through the vows, all of it. He turned to Preston. "Preston William Hayes," he said, "do you take Audrey Elizabeth Miller to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, keeping yourself only unto her, so long as you both shall live?" Preston looked right into my eyes, his own eyes shining with fake sincerity. His voice was strong and clear, ringing through the church. "I do. Forsaking all others." The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly brazen, it almost made me laugh out loud. He said it without a flicker of hesitation. Then, Pastor Jenkins turned to me. "Audrey Elizabeth Miller, do you take Preston William Hayes to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, keeping yourself only unto him, so long as you both shall live?" This was it. My moment. The crossroads. The moment to say I do and condemn myself to a life built on secrets and lies, to become a willing participant in my own deception. Or, the moment to burn their world to the ground with the simple, explosive power of the truth. I looked out at the congregation, at all those faces filled with expectation and joy. I looked at my father in the front row, his face pale but his eyes encouraging me, telling me to be strong. I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with that stupid lace handkerchief, the consummate actress. I took a small breath. I turned my head slightly toward the small microphone on the lectern. "Actually," I said, my voice perfectly calm and carrying clearly through the cathedral's sound system, "I have something to say first." The cathedral fell into a perfect, stunned silence. The air crackled. The organist, who had been playing softly, let his hands fall from the keys. Preston's hand tightened on mine, his confident smile finally faltering, replaced by a flicker of confusion and alarm. "Audrey?" Pastor Jenkins looked utterly bewildered. "Audrey? Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, Pastor," I said, turning my body to face the congregation directly. 200 faces stared back at me, their expressions shifting from happy celebration to confused curiosity. I just realized that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest about everything. Preston's grip on my hand was now painfully tight. "Audrey, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice low and urgent. I pulled my hand free from his with a sharp tug and stepped slightly away from him, moving closer to the microphone to make sure everyone could hear me. In the front row, my mother had gone very still, her lace handkerchief forgotten in her lap, her smile frozen on her face. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I began, my voice steady and strong. "It means everything to me that you would take the time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after." Murmurs began to ripple through the pews. I could see Sabrina in the back, her camera discreetly positioned. "Good. But I've learned recently," I continued, my voice rising slightly, "that happy endings are built on truth, not on beautiful, elaborate lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues." "Audrey," Preston reached for me again, a look of panic now dawning in his eyes, but I stepped further away, putting the lectern between us. "Yesterday," I announced, my voice ringing out in the silent church, "I discovered that my fiancé, Preston, and my mother, Lorraine, have been having an affair." The words hit the cathedral like a physical blow. A collective gasp echoed off the high stone walls. Someone in the back dropped their program, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. In the front row, I watched the color drain completely from Judge Hayes's face as he turned to stare in horror at his son. "I found my mother's journal," I continued, pressing my advantage, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Detailing their relationship. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me and my father." My mother shot to her feet, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. "Audrey, stop this nonsense right this instant." "Sit down, Lorraine." The sharp, powerful command came from my father, who had also risen from his seat. His voice, honed by 30 years of preaching, carried the undeniable authority of God himself, and my mother sank back into the pew as if she'd been struck. Preston was now frantically trying to salvage the unsalvageable. "Everyone, please," he said, his voice strained, "there's been some kind of terrible misunderstanding. Audrey is she's emotional." "Am I?" I asked, turning to him, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Then maybe you can clear up this misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house? While my father was at his meeting, planning your bachelor party, no less?" The cathedral erupted in a fresh wave of shocked whispers and gasps. Preston's face went from white to ashen gray. "Is it a misunderstanding," I pressed on, my voice loud and clear, "that you've been using our joint credit card, the one for our wedding, to buy cases of expensive Pinot Noir for my mother? The very same wine that she specifically mentioned loving in her journal entries about your sordid affair?" Judge Hayes was on his feet now, his face a mask of pure fury and shame. "Preston," he thundered, his voice shaking with rage. "Tell me this isn't true." Preston looked around the cathedral wildly, like a cornered animal, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire meticulously planned life crumbling to dust in real time. I can explain," he stammered, looking from his father to me. "Oh, please do explain," I said, giving him a bright, terrible smile. "Explain to your father. Explain to your law partners sitting in the third row. Explain to everyone here who believed you were a man of honor, how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Explain how you planned to marry me and live in our home while continuing your affair with her." The silence that followed was deafening. Every single person in that cathedral was staring at him, waiting for his explanation. And he had nothing. No smooth lawyer arguments, no charming deflections. Just the ugly, naked truth, finally exposed for all to see. In the front row, my mother was weeping. Not the delicate, proud tears from before, but harsh, ugly, guttural sobs of a woman whose life had just publicly imploded. "Audrey," she choked out through her tears. "Please, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, turning to face her directly, my voice cold as ice. "I understand that you decided your daughter's happiness was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again. I understand that you looked at my fiancé, at my life, and decided you deserved him more than I did. That's not, I never meant." "You never meant to get caught," I finished for her. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke, undeniable and suffocating. My mother crumpled back into her seat, her beautiful emerald dress now looking gaudy and desperate. I looked out at the congregation one last time, at our family, our friends, our colleagues, all the people who had watched me grow up. Their faces showed a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, sympathy, pity, anger. But I refused to be a victim. "I want you all to know that this isn't about revenge," I said, my voice strong and clear, the final word. "This is about truth. This is about refusing to build a life on someone else's lies. And this is about choosing myself, my dignity, over people who chose each other over me." If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me to keep going. Please, comment with the number 1, and then listen to what I did next. I turned. And I began walking back down that long aisle. My cathedral train swept behind me like a queen's robe. As I passed the front row, I stopped for a brief moment in front of my father. I leaned down and whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I'm not sorry that you learned the truth." He nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face, but his eyes, for the first time in days, were filled with pride, not just pain. "I love you, sweetheart," he whispered back. "You did the right thing." I placed a small kiss on his forehead, tasting the salt of his sorrow, then I straightened up and continued my walk. Behind me, chaos was finally erupting. I could hear Judge Hayes yelling at Preston in a low, furious voice. I could hear guests standing up, their whispers growing into a loud buzz. I could hear my mother sobbing uncontrollably while Mrs. Gable from the flower committee stared at her with a look of undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. Not once. I walked right through those heavy cathedral doors with my head held high, my wedding dress flowing behind me like a river of ivory silk, and out into the bright, crisp, beautiful light of the rest of my life. The parking lot behind St. Jude's Cathedral became my sanctuary. For a few blessed moments, it was quiet. I stood beside my beat-up old Honda, a stark contrast to the limousines waiting out front, and just breathed. I took in the crisp October air, filling my lungs, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in months. The sounds of chaos from inside the cathedral were a dull roar now, muffled by the heavy wooden doors, raised voices, crying, the sharp scraping of chairs as people scrambled to leave. My phone, which I'd tucked into a hidden pocket in my dress, started buzzing relentlessly. A flood of calls and texts. I ignored them all, until I saw Sabrina's name flash across the screen. Sabrina, I answered, my voice surprisingly calm. Audrey. Holy. Audrey. I am speechless. Did you really just? Did you get it all on camera? I asked, cutting to the chase. Every single second, she said, her voice buzzing with journalistic excitement. The gasps, your mother's face, Judge Hayes looking like he was about to have a stroke. My editor is going to lose his mind when he sees this footage. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Good, I said simply. Her voice softened. But are you okay? I mean, really okay? I considered the question for a long moment, standing there in my ridiculously expensive wedding dress in an empty church parking lot, having just publicly detonated my own life. A strange sense of peace washed over me. I'm perfect, I said. And I realized, with a jolt of surprise, that I actually meant it. Sabrina was right. Within the hour, the story was spreading like wildfire through our social circles. Within 3 hours, her footage was on local news websites under sensational headlines. By that evening, the hashtag Wedding Revenge was trending nationally on social media. People were sharing the video, dissecting every moment, my calm delivery, my mother's theatrical sobbing, Preston's deer-in-the-headlights panic. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The very next day, Judge Hayes issued a formal statement through his law firm announcing that his son, Preston, was taking an indefinite leave of absence to address serious personal matters. It was a public disownment dressed up in corporate jargon. Preston's career, the one he had been willing to sacrifice my life for, was over. No reputable law firm in Chicago would touch him after a scandal this public, this sordid. His mother, Eleanor Hayes, a woman I had always admired for her grace, sent a handwritten letter to my hotel, delivered by courier that same evening. Dear Audrey, it read, there are no words to express my horror and shame at my son's behavior, or my profound admiration for your courage today. You deserved so much better than this betrayal. Please know that you will always have my deepest respect and support. With sincerest regrets, Eleanor. The congregation of St. Jude's, my father's flock for 30 years, rallied around him in a way that brought tears to my eyes. They flooded his office with calls, brought casseroles to the house, and sent letters expressing their unwavering support for him and their disgust at what had been done to our family. But the most satisfying consequence, I have to admit, came from my mother's prized social circle. These were the women she'd spent years cultivating, trying to impress with her perfect marriage, her perfect home, her perfect daughter. Within 24 hours, she had been quietly asked to step down from her position on the boards of 3 different charities. Her weekly lunch invitations evaporated. Her phone stopped ringing. Lorraine Miller, who had built her entire identity on the foundation of public perception, suddenly found herself a social pariah, the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went. The very thing she feared most, public shame, had become her reality. She tried to call me, of course. Dozens of times. She left long, rambling, tearful voicemails filled with excuses and accusations and pleas for understanding. I let every single call go to voicemail. I listened to none of them. 3 days after my non-wedding, I was back at my father's house. The house felt different, hollowed out. I found him in his study, surrounded by cardboard boxes, carefully packing away 30 years' worth of theological books and sermon notes. "You don't have to resign, Dad," I said for the 10th time since he'd told me his decision. "The church board supports you. The congregation loves you." "Yes, I do," he said, his voice tired but resolute. He didn't look up from the book he was wrapping in newspaper. "I can't stand up in that pulpit every Sunday and preach about the sanctity of marriage, about truth and honor, when my own wife, my own house, made a mockery of those very things. The congregation deserves a leader whose life isn't built on a foundation of lies." He had aged 10 years in 72 hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped. But there was a new kind of peace about him, too, the peace of a man who'd finally been freed from a weight he didn't even know he was carrying. "So what will you do?" I asked, sitting down on a stack of books. "I've been offered an interim pastor position at a small, quiet church in Vermont. A friend of a friend from seminary. It'll be a change. It'll give me time to heal. To figure out what comes next." "And Mom?" I asked, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. His face, which had been so full of sorrow, hardened. "Your mother has made her choices, Audrey. For a long, long time. Now she can finally live with the consequences." Through the study window, I could see her, loading suitcases into the trunk of her Mercedes. She was moving in with her sister in Baltimore, the only family member who was still speaking to her. "Have you talked to her at all?" "Once," he said, taping up a box with methodical precision. "I called her yesterday to tell her my lawyer would be sending over the divorce papers." The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. In the world I grew up in, that word had been unthinkable, a sign of failure. Now, it sounded like freedom. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered. "Don't be," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes clear. "You didn't break our family, Audrey. You exposed the fact that it was already broken. You saved me from living the rest of my life as a fool." The next 6 months were a blur of dismantling one life and cautiously beginning to build another. I sold my condo in Chicago, quit my job, and packed up my belongings. I needed a clean break, a place where I wasn't that woman from the wedding video. I ended up in Alexandria, Virginia, a quiet, historic city just outside of D.C. I found a small apartment with a little garden in the back and a new job at a smaller, independent publishing house. The salary wasn't as high as my job in Chicago, and there was no corner office, but the work was more challenging, more creative. And best of all, it offered anonymity. I could walk down the street, grab a coffee, browse in a bookstore, and just be Audrey. Not a story. Not a scandal. Just a person. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. I worked. I read. I planted flowers in my little garden. I talked to my dad on the phone every Sunday afternoon. "How's Vermont?" I'd ask. "Beautiful," he'd always say. "Peaceful. The leaves are turning. The congregation here is small but genuine. No politics, no drama. Just faith and community." He sounded lighter, younger, than he had in years. "Are you happy, Dad?" "I'm getting there, honey," he'd say. "I really am. What about you? How's the new job?" "I love it," I'd say, and it was the truth. The city, the work. It feels like a fresh start. Like I can finally breathe again. The viral fame of the wedding video had eventually faded, as all internet stories do, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. But for several weeks, I'd been a strange kind of internet celebrity. I had received thousands of emails and messages from women all over the world, sharing their own stories of betrayal, thanking me for having the courage to speak up, for showing them that it was possible to choose themselves. It was overwhelming, but ultimately, incredibly empowering. "Have you heard from her?" Dad would ask tentatively at the end of every call. No, I'd say. And I hadn't, not directly. Lorraine had tried to reach out through intermediaries, my aunt in Baltimore, old family friends, even my former boss. But I had my lawyer send a firm but polite letter making it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals, I learned, are too profound for forgiveness. At least not the kind of cheap, easy forgiveness that pretends nothing happened. Maybe someday, years from now, a conversation would be possible. But not yet. What about Preston? His attorney contacted mine last month, I told him. Apparently, he's in some intensive therapy program and wants to make amends. I laughed, a real laugh, with no bitterness left in it. I told my lawyer to inform his that the best amends he could possibly make would be to leave me alone for the rest of his life. One Saturday afternoon in April, as I was sitting in my garden with a cup of coffee and a new manuscript, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found a delivery man holding the most enormous, beautiful bouquet of wildflowers I had ever seen: daisies, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, lavender, all the flowers I had wanted for my wedding. My heart skipped a beat. The card was small and simple. It read, "For choosing yourself. From someone who understands. A friend." There was no signature, no return address. But I didn't need one. Through the online support groups I had found, I had connected with dozens of other women who had walked through fire. We were a quiet, informal sisterhood of survivors. And we looked out for each other. I brought the flowers inside, arranged them in a large glass vase, and placed them right in the middle of my kitchen table. Their wild, untamed, natural beauty brightened the entire room. I went back to my garden, back to my manuscript, back to the quiet, peaceful, deliberate life I was building for myself, one true and honest choice at a time. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I found myself standing at a podium in a grand ballroom in Washington, D.C., looking out at a sea of hundreds of faces. They were writers, publishers, editors, and readers who had all gathered for the National Women's Literature Conference. The little nameplate in front of me read, Audrey Miller, keynote speaker. And the title of my speech was, The Power of an Authentic Voice. A year ago, I began, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily through the ballroom's sound system. I stood at an altar in front of 200 people. I was wearing a beautiful dress, and I was about to make a choice that would change everything. I didn't make the choice everyone expected me to make. Instead, I made the choice that honored who I really am, and the truth of my own story. I looked out at the audience, and I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats. My story, thanks to the internet, had become a strange kind of touchstone for many. Not because of the salacious drama or the revenge, but because of the deeper, more universal truth it represented. We are taught from the time we are little girls, I said, my voice filled with a passion I had discovered in myself over the past year, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity. We are taught that being nice is more valuable than being honest. We are taught that other people's comfort matters more than our own truth. We are told to swallow our pain, to handle things privately, to not make a scene. I paused, and I thought of that morning in the hotel room, when I'd looked at myself in the mirror and decided to become someone new, someone who would no longer be silent. But here's what I learned that day, and what I have learned every day since. When you choose truth over comfort, when you choose your own dignity over a beautiful lie, when you choose yourself over people who have chosen to betray you, you don't just change your own life. You don't just save yourself. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. Your voice becomes a light for other people who are lost in the dark. The applause, when it came, was warm and sustained and felt like a wave of acceptance and understanding. After my speech, dozens of women lined up to speak with me, to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence, authenticity over approval. One young woman came up to me, tears in her eyes. I left my husband last week, she whispered. After 10 years of being made to feel small. I kept thinking about your story. You made me feel brave. I hugged her, and in that moment, I knew that all the pain, all the ugliness, had been worth it. It had been forged into something useful, something good. Late that night, I sat in my quiet hotel room with a glass of wine, scrolling through messages from women who had watched my conference speech online. Their words were all variations on the same powerful theme: thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dad. Watched your speech online. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. I stared at the message for a long time, a smile touching my lips. He meant his mother, of course, the strong, graceful woman whose veil I had worn on my non-wedding day. But a small, hopeful part of me wondered if he also, in some small way, meant Lorraine. If somewhere in Baltimore, living with the consequences of her choices, my mother had watched her daughter speak to a ballroom full of people about courage and truth, and felt something like pride mixed in with all her regret, I would probably never know for sure. And I realized, with a sense of calm acceptance, that I was okay with that. Outside my hotel window, the city lights of Washington, D.C. sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in that maze of lights were millions of people, all living out their stories, all making choices. Some brave, some cowardly, some that would change everything. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast. To all of them, but especially to the ones who would choose themselves when the world told them to choose silence. The ones who would speak the truth when speaking lies would be so much easier. The ones who would find the strength to walk away from beautiful prisons disguised as happily ever afters. Here's to the ones who choose freedom, I thought. Even when freedom looks like standing all alone at an altar, telling the truth to a world that would often rather believe a beautiful lie. I finished my wine, closed my laptop, and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, I would fly back home, back to my life in Alexandria, my job, my apartment, my garden of wildflowers. The life I had built not on someone else's broken foundation, but on my own unshakable truth. And if that wasn't a happily ever after, it was something even better. It was a beginning. A beginning that belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to stand up for yourself, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Your support means the world to me. Take care of yourselves and each other.